would be next, Hartman.
Again, there seems to be dissent between the debt, paying it off and not paying it off. To understand the debt, we have to go back about 150 years ago to understand the debt. We're talking about a generation here that had nothing to do with the original debt. To understand the debt, we would have to go back to the formation of the Bank of England in 1697. Okay, so that's even more than 150 years ago. What we don't seem to realize is that through this debt, what has been formed is an international cartel of monopolies. Okay, these monopolies are paralyzing not only this generation, but the future generations. Now, the only way I know of demolishing these monopolies and bringing everything back to manageable status and giving freedom of action, or freedom of enterprise to the younger people and the next generations is by demolishing the monopolies. And that is by defaulting on the debt. In other words, they must collapse because they have been created, number one, these monopolies, with the labor of generations of people. They have been created. And they have been created amorally. In other words, the debt was amoral in the first place. They contravened the constitutions of the countries. They contravened, they paid off some politicians. From now on, you borrow from us. With the interest that the generations have paid, they have formed these monopolies, industrial monopoly. Now, I don't know if you really realize what a monopoly is. And that is a paralysis of action. You cannot compete against monopolies. They dictate the price and they control production and consumption. Okay? Therefore, I must go back to say, scrap the debt and let's face the consequences. You know, remember the debt was formed amorally. And through the formation of the debt, they've controlled the wealth of the world. And they are doing so. They are controlling the wealth of the world. What I see basically is about four problems. And we're talking about the issuance of money as being one, how money is being issued, whether you do it through dividends, but there is other ways. The number two problem is the retraction of money, because money, too much money, also money must be balanced and must be retracted from circulation, or you would have inflation past the point of the GNP, the gross national product. We have a problem of stability of value on the money. In other words, money must be a measure, a fixed measure. It cannot fluctuate. Money is a measure just as a mile or a pound or a kilogram, etc., etc. And the fourth problem that we have is the elimination of usury. Okay? That's all we have is four problems. Now, if you're saying, let's repay the debt, that means that for the next 3 or 4 generations, they will reinforce the industrial monopolies. By the time we finish paying the debt, we will have no industry. We will have no way to work because they own everything. I mean, it's clear to me. If we repay the debt, we're even going to be in a worse situation. In other words, our future generations are going to be slaves. They will work on somebody else's property. Okay, slavery means to work on somebody else's property. That's the way I see it.
I'd like to say something here which is so important. We're missing that as we're going along. missing that as we're going along. How many of you know that we are not short of money, but that we have too much right now? How many know that? One or two?
It's in the hands of the wrong people, Joe.
Yeah, okay.
Which is a better way of saying it.
Okay. We have $525 billion of COVID cash in Canada, and we have $690 billion of credit. And credit works just like money. So you have an inflation rate, even right now, you have too much money in credit. Too much. Now, if you have to pay the dividend, you only exaggerate that problem. Yeah, those are figures you can go down and get them from the library anytime you like. $690 billion of credit where industry and whatnot borrows money, and individuals, consumers and all, and $525 billion, which is somewhere around $1,100 billion of credit and money, and the GNP is $689 billion. So you have a surplus of about $400 billion of too much money already. Now you're going to pay a dividend. Answer that.
Before Mr. Jones gets up, I just want to comment. Probably a lot of you people heard what Mazinkowski said the other day. I think it was twice on television. He said if we dared borrow money to start public works, in other words, put people to work, he said the I.M.F, International Monetary Fund, would come down on us. And what is he saying? We have no say in government. They're trying to take us down to a level, bring the third world up, so we're all on an even keel, and then they claim that the one world system will work, according to them. Mr. Jones, would you read?
I was just going to ask you, is the foreign debt about 1/3 of our debt, about 35%?
35% of the rough, very just a little bit, 35% of your foreign debt is national, 35% is provincial, and 30-some odd percent is corporation, in the corporation. And the last figures I had are now a little over because it's so hard to get to Ottawa and get the figures, because my figures are 2 years old. And they were net, after you deducted everything that other countries owe us, were $260 billion. I would wager that at about $300 billion is our foreign debt. So we owe other countries. And we cannot cancel that out, or the American army will be in here and say, just a minute, you fellas, all of these industry that we've invested in here, you're not going to turn around. You're not the boss.
Well,
you're going to have to pay your foreign debt.
America is close to $2 trillion into debt.
I thought it was 4.
Just
Okay.
about 4.
Just about 4.
It's about 4, yeah. Okay, but I was saying just the figures
Used
that
to be
the
2.
newspapers are giving us. So America is in the same boat as we are. It's every country is in the same boat as we are. We have no alternate. This system must collapse.
Mr. Thauberger, you forgot to mention the private debts.
No, I know, because what we're talking is
Oh.
all Canadian debt can be handled by canceling it out or by inflating it out. I'm talking that the bugbear that we've got to face is the foreign debt, because that's what killed Argentina, that's what killed Mexico and Brazil and all those countries.
Well, I have in mind that we are paying interest on the private debt, which down the states, the figure the private debt is 3 times larger than the national debt.
That's right.
And we're paying interest on it. I just thought I'd mention that. I think Mr. Pellick was next.
Well, all I wanted to ask is this question that Mr. Thauberger said. Who can answer that at some point in the future, like to address that?
Did everyone hear that?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to repeat again. Mr. Thauberger said, we are not short of money, we have too much money, and the dividend would only exaggerate the problem. There's a very simple answer to that, and I'd like to address that sometime.
You mean while you're here?
Yeah.
Well, if there's no more
Go
questions,
ahead, yeah.
why don't you do it now?
The answer is very simple. Both in what Mr. Palmer said and what Mr. Thauberger said, there is a large amount of money, but that money doesn't count unless it is in circulation.
Right.
Now that's where the shortage falls in. You can have billions of dollars in some debt or in some investment or whatever. As long as it's not in circulation, there's not enough money with which to buy. buy and sell. Now the problem is not a major problem. The quote monopolies unquote that Mr. Palmer referred to are basically banks who work on fractional reserve system. And it's very simple. All you have to do is increase the reserve requirement by 1%, and there's a tremendous shortage of money, even with all the money that we have now. There'd be a tremendous shortage of money in circulation. So then, to compensate for the shortfall, you would have to create money, as Mr. Goria said, through the national dividend. Now, the art of government in the future, without getting into detail, I believe will be how you spend or how you introduce the dividend into society. And a question referred to over and over again is, do governments have the right to the newly created money first? Do the major banks have the right to the newly created money first? Or does each individual citizen have the right to the newly created money first? You give it to the individual citizen, then if it's needed to operate, you tax him. And there's a lot involved here, but basically the problem is a non-problem if we understand such
All right, so just didn't handle the question I told you. You've got $690 billion of credit. You recognize that that does the work of money? The credit.
The money supply, as defined by the banks or defined by the economists, is checkable bank accounts and cash. That's the major portion of the money supply. Other investments are not part of the money supply, they're investments. I have to define what is called credit. Now, that kind of money that can be used in circulation, can be used to buy and sell, is part of the money supply. And it's that part that we're addressing here. Now, the other question about debt, I don't disagree with you. I think you only part, and you're labeled part of it. There's a massive and growing overhead of consumer, corporate, private, national, international debt. And the debt has to increase. There's no other way. Because the way to create money today is to have the people borrow money into existence. And as money is being borrowed into existence, obviously the debt has to grow. And we not only create money today, but we'll end it up to be paid back with interest. And this is the crux of the matter as I see it. This is what we have to address. Unless this is addressed, and addressed properly, with proper research, with economic models, I think we're going to be talking with ideas that have partial truths in them. A lot of the things you said were correct, but there are certain things like this problem about exaggerating the problem with a dividend is definitely untrue, because though there's a lot of money and a lot of debt, if you increase the reserve ratio, you prevent the banks from borrowing anymore. If you increase the reserve ratio to 100%, the banks become like stockbrokers. They have to take other people's money and use it like a stockbroker without creating any. So that's not a problem. The problem is how do you put all this together in a proper economic model that will be an alternative to what's happening today. Now that's the problem.
Can I comment on that answer? On that question, I should say. Reiterating that all money issued, whether it's cash or credit, is issued at debt-bearing interest. In other words, it must be returned to its source. So therefore, it's a negative money. I consider as negative money. It has been issued by borrowing. It must be returned to pay the principal. Other money must be found to pay the interest. So therefore, what we're talking about We're talking about creating victims in our society which eventually, mathematically, will end up with our money to barter or to trade with. I should say to trade with. If the issuance... Could you shut the door, maybe? Yeah. As I said, the first problem that we have is how to issue money. Right now we're issuing it as negative money. Now, we should understand that we must issue it as a positive money. To issue a positive money, that means that the government would have to pay somebody at no cost, without borrowing. In other words, we have 50% of the workforce in Canada which works for municipal government, provincial governments, federal governments. Plus, within this workforce, there is contractors, subcontractors who are working directly or indirectly for the government. Now, this sector of the population is called the public sector, the civil sector. Why not have the government pay them directly, without taxes, without any cost? In other words, the money now being printed, being paid out to these people for work, cannot be inflationary, because the money's paying for works and services rendered. Now, these people, these civil servants, to survive, they have to go to this private sector, to the industry, to buy the goods to take home. You know, there is goods that you take home into your living room and you own, and there is goods that you cannot take home, which are public works and services. In other words, we would have to go back to the res republican concept, you know. So on one hand, we have to make a choice. Right now, we're issuing all money through the banking system as negative money, which it must be returned to them, and eventually will bust us, it will destroy us. It's debt money that we're talking about. The other side is issue positive money for work and services rendered. Now, that amount of money, I'm sure that it will sustain the other 50% of the workforce, which is called the private sector, without having to create monopolies. So that should solve the first problem, the issuance of money. But we can't do that if you keep saying, let's pay taxes and let's pay the debt, because we keep funding this monopolistic system. That is the problem. In other words, we're starving private enterprise. No more capitalism. To me, I find no difference between capitalism and communism. They both concentrate wealth in the hands of few.
What you propose is exactly what I didn't address effectively. If you have the government with a pool of money, and they use this debt-free money, the money that you're talking of, coming into existence debt-free, and it's needed in the equilibrium of the economic setup. If that government goes into government hands to spend as government wants, there's a philosophical difference. You have the authoritarian government will do it all. We will decide what is good. Russia's had this. Nazi Germany had this. Almost every time that the government has issued debt-free money, in the case of the United States, Abraham Lincoln and his green dollars, they're used to finance war. Germany used it financing World War II. Russia's used it financing the Cold War and all the rest. On the other side, we have social credit, which says this positive money, debt-free money, goes to the hands of the citizens, who will then tell government what to do, number one, by voting for the people whose policies they agree with, and number two, voting their tax dollars toward programs they want, not what government decides is best for them. Right now we are experiencing what government thinks best for us. We disagree with many programs the federal government is has undertaken for us. Our provincial government the same, with the underwriting of massive loans for private enterprises who are going down by the dozens, billions of dollars going down the drain, because citizens didn't have the money in their hand. The heritage money, for example, could have been going into the hands of private Albertans who could have used the money to buy shares in companies. They didn't do that. Government knew best. They used the heritage fund to pump millions into the tar sands, this item, that. Now they're building a great riverboat in Edmonton, and the government is underwriting a loan of almost $1 billion to build this boat. So come to Edmonton in a couple of years and you have a boat ride, if it's still viable.
If I may continue, like, the problem of retraction of money is very simple because we already do it. Okay? Not only we're paying taxes to have public works and services, but we're also paying when we use public works and services. Okay? We're paying taxes to have the LRT, but we're also paying to use it. We're paying taxes to have a university, but we're also paying tuition fees to use the universities. So we're paying twice. What I'm saying is, let the government pay the public works and services, and let the citizens pay when they use them only. No taxes whatsoever. None. No taxes. Zero taxation. Say that again?
Sounds so good.
You know,
Mr. Palma suggested something that the government would basically be using the positive money. The positive money is the money that's created by the bank, is what I assume you're talking about.
not created by the government himself, not
Okay,
by the banks.
there's
That's negative money.
There's a misunderstanding about money. I don't understand what negative and positive money is in your context. According to the context of the economists, there are basically two ways of creating money. One, you let the people borrow the money into existence. That's what's happening today. It's been happening since basically 1940s. the Second
That's
World War.
negative money.
The other way is give the money to the public. Create the new money and give it to the public. Now what is actually happening in technical sense today is what we call open market operations. The Bank of Canada writes a check upon itself and it buys treasury bills. And treasury bill is an IOU. And that's the way money is created today. It goes on through the banking system, multiple expansion. You can go throughout the whole thing, but that's details. The other way, you would have the Bank of Canada write a check upon itself. Now, to whom should that check go?
To pay public works and
You
services.
say just to pay taxes. I believe
No,
Glenn.
no.
You said
Not taxes.
Glenn just made that rebuttal perfect. He said there are people in society that are far more needy than the taxpayers. Those people don't pay taxes. By the very virtue that they're a Canadian citizen, are they entitled to the newly created money from the check that the Bank of Canada writes upon itself, which has no money in the account? It's an unlimited fund. And that's the understanding of the creation of money. Now, we either continue with open market operations the way it is now, or we try what social credit has been promoting for a long time with a sort of partial explanation how this whole system works. And that is the issue. And the only way I can see this happening and coming to pass properly is to hire a bunch of economists and say, examine the other way, make a proper economic model, and let's see if it'll work. And if it does, let's compare the two systems. And if anything, I will tell you that any economist, and this has to be a monetary economist, money and banking economist. Not every economist understands this. The economist will tell you that even if the system doesn't work, it'll be tremendous importance to give us a comparison of how the system presently works, to enlighten us. And I have faith enough that the system works would work to the extent that as soon as I can sell my remaining 2 pieces of property that I have, I will underwrite that kind of research myself personally, which will cost about $10,000. If anybody wants to put up $10,000, we can start with that research this year. And that'll be the difference between social credit that some people were tired of for the last 50 years, or 75 years, or whatever, and what's happening today. One research project, and I bet you that most of you here can come up with $10,000 each. No problem. I'm sure once that is established and the research project is underway, you will find that there are many little known phenomena in economics that people were not aware of. And one of them is that the Bank of Canada writes a check upon itself and buys public debt, treasury bills. And with that, we borrow money into existence, and we have to proliferate debt, a massive and growing overhead of debt upon society that keeps getting worse and worse, which requires GST to meet the payments. You prevent the debt in the first place, you don't need the GST right off the bat. And then, instead of having a whole lot of social programs because the prices rise, the national dividend will help from the bottom end. Social programs will be unnecessary from the top end. The standard of living will rise. Gradually, but positively.
Mr. Chairman, could you announce when Mr. Hinman is going to speak? That'll be.
You'll have to ask him. You got something to say, have you?
Always.
After dinner?
Anytime.
Well, before I put the question about dinner to all these gentlemen, I'm at your service, I want your input. I'm just going to make 2 little comments. I kind of like what you said. But we don't have to worry about being knee-deep in money when the Bank of Canada, run by the Board of Directors, supervised by government, that's my opinion, issues money, as long as there's work in production back in that dollar. If the government issues $1 million to build jails, hospitals, schools, and the staff to bring, you have to have work back in that. And I think as long as that goes on, we're safe. Eh? Is that what you said?
I'd like to answer that. And then inflation rises. And then to prevent inflation, they increase the interest rates to 20%, 19%, and so on. They kill the economy, and now they're trying to restart it again. This is the present system. But as long as the government has the present system, there will be problems, because by nature, the problems will have to do with debt, and debt is costly. There's interest.
Well, you're talking from the present banking system, I don't. But anyway, just mention that. There's one other thing I want to mention. I used to talk to a fellow who was pretty good in economics. He says too much money in circulation, like Mr. Thauberger. And I asked Art Dixon one time at a public meeting. I said, you're talking about too much money in circulation. How come all these people can't buy what they want? I didn't get an answer. There was 3 men on the platform. As I said a few minutes ago, the money, excess money Thauberger's talking about, is in the hands of shareholders, bank, big interests, etc. And if they keep making money, like Palma said down there, they're going to own everything and strangle us completely. We have to take care of the shareholders. And under my banking system, which I won't get into now, we don't need shareholders in the bank, I assure you. No shareholders, period. But anyway, I put the question to you now. You want to stop for dinner now?
Yes.
Everybody's hungry? Sure you're hungry. Who isn't hungry? One lone guy. Okay, we meet back here. Before you run off, what time it is? 12:13 now.
1 o'clock.
1:30?
1 o'clock. It grew out of the people system. They wanted to know how you're going to get just prices. And everybody's found out since then that there isn't any just price. The price is what the willing buyer will pay for what the willing seller wants to sell. But at any rate, we spent a lot of time to explain it and turn people off.
That's right.
The fact that
you're trying to give them money back by cutting the prices didn't make any difference. There's some statistics that illustrate what I mean. Sears has 41,000 items in its store. And of those 41,000, many of them have ABC grades. Now, can you imagine what kind of bookkeeping it would take to decide what discount you'll get back on each of these items? And the other thing is, the fellow that's selling it sets a price. And then we come along and say, well, that's too high, we'll discount it. But the higher he sets it, the more discount he gets. It was just an invitation to some unscrupulous things when it came right down to it. So much for the just price. And then the managing of money. How much money in the economy? Who's going to say? It's interesting to remember that in the American system one time when things got out of hand, Nixon decided that he would cut the money supply back until it stopped inflation. He cut it back till he broke a lot of people, and the inflation rate remained just slightly higher each of 3 years. I say that to illustrate to you that maybe our idea that we can balance the production with the money supply, maybe it's fallacious. I don't think you can. I'll illustrate it like this. You can get a pretty good idea of how much manufacturing is done. But in our economy today, goods, material things, are a very weak part of the economy. Knowledge, education, all of these things take precedence. And suppose you're going to evaluate education. Just how do you do it? And as I pointed out, if you were trying to list all of the goods and services offered and say, we'll put up enough money to buy them all, then you have to remember that there are such things as prostitution. It's available and people will buy it, no matter what you do. How are you going to fit that in to the economy? There are drugs. Nobody reports them. That would be foolishness. How are you going to fit it into the economy? But the demand for money is there. What I'm pointing out to you is that maybe we better get off our high horse on some of these things that we have been saying and recognize that there are elements of poor thinking there. Just how much money needs to be in the economy, nobody knows. Nobody knows whether if the government took it back to itself, it could do any better job than is done even now by the banks and the bankers. There are so many factors get in. If it's going to mean that we're going to do our very best to accomplish two things. First, to so balance the money supply that inflation can be held to very edger limits. The second is to be sure that this increased spending power gets in the hands of the people who consume. That's if it's going to mean that we're going to do our very best to he goes and makes a couple of speeches, and pretty soon all the people want that. They never even thought about it if he hadn't sold them on the island. That's politics. If we're going to have social credit, if it's going to mean that we're going to do our very best to accomplish two things. First, to so balance the money supply that inflation can be held to very edger limits. The second is to be sure that this increased spending power gets in the hands of the people who consume. That's where I disagree a little with my friend, not in principle. But if you don't get this money to the consumers, if you pay the government debt with it, you haven't created the demand for those products that you know must be consumed. I'm only going to touch one or two other little questions, and then I'll be quiet, and that's hard for me to be. One of these is the principle that you can't control morality, you can't control people's feelings with law. Sometimes I look at the law and I just can't believe it. And yet people get along with it. So what we need to do first is decide that we will try to balance the purchasing power with the goods and services that people want. And we'll put the spending power in the hands of the consumer. No other system will work. So to me, it's very imperative that if we take back the supply, the management of money supply, it has to be done through a commission, the most intelligent people we have. And by trial and error, they'll finally arrive at a set of statistics which tells them what will happen in the economy. It's surprising what little things can set off the economy. Did you ever hear of hula hoops? Nobody could have said there's going to be some hula hoops on the market with they issue a little more money. Well, all of a sudden, every kid in the country got to have a hula hoop. And those are the things that happen all the time. I just reiterate one or two things. It's impossible to know what total production is at any one time. And when I say production, I mean the goods and services that are available. They can be increased and so quickly that you can hardly believe it. By the time a government can act or a bank can act, many times it's got clear out of hand. So social credit is not the answer to the world problem, but it can be one of the strongest factors in the maintaining of democracy, in so balancing our economy as Douglas wanted it to be, that with little effort, each of our people can have the essentials at least, and can have that leisure time which he thought was so important. And there again comes the other side of the story. It's the leisure time people have that often cause all our troubles. Unless people learn to use leisure time properly, it's no blessing. Well, I'll just sum it up quickly. Social credit simply says that the people should get what they want, if you can find out. They should have freedom with security, and we can do a little bit about that through the dividend and others. And last of all, that if a thing is possible, it can be made monetarily possible. It's a law that nobody has been able to change. And so you're going to have your busts and your booms. The best we can hope to do is ameliorate them so that they are not suffering and that they don't lead in the end to national disagreements and hatred. Thank you for listening. I'll be quiet for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hinman.